The prairie was still as the world's first breath when Elias Boone rode across it, the dawn painting the rim of the earth in pale fire. His horse's hooves thudded soft in the sand, a rhythm lonely enough to echo in his bones. He had lived with silence for years, his own kind of exile, but that morning silence was broken by something fragile. At first it was only a whisper the wind carried, like a reed quivering in water. Then it came again, thin, urgent, not the call of bird nor coyote. A cry. He pulled his reins and listened. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. The cry rose once more, muffled as though it came from the belly of the earth. Elias slid down from his saddle, boots crunching against dry grass, and walked toward the sound. There, tangled in sagebrush, lay a sack, coarse burlap stained with dirt. It shifted once, then stilled. He knelt. His fingers trembled as he pulled at the knotted twine. The fabric opened, and a tiny face turned toward the light. A baby girl. Her skin was pale, her breath ragged, but her eyes, Lord above, they blinked, catching dawn's fire. She whimpered, and in the hush between heartbeats, Elias swore he heard the faintest sound, almost formed words carried on her breath. Mama. His chest tightened. Memory swelled like a flood. His wife's face in candlelight. The baby they had buried before she'd learned to walk. He had not prayed in years, but now he whispered, "Merciful God," as he gathered the sack's small burden into his arms. By the time he reached town, the sun had climbed and gossip had woken. Elias carried the child close, but already the look sharpened. Mrs. Hattie Crow, standing outside her store with hands on her hips, narrowed her eyes. "Whose mistake is this, Boone?" she said, loud enough for the loafers on the porch to snicker. The sheriff leaned against a post, squinting. "Not our responsibility," Sheriff Whitaker muttered, spitting tobacco into the dust. Reverend Gray shook his head as though dusted with pity. "The wages of sin mustn't be laid upon us. You'd do right to turn her over to the county." But no one moved to take her. Not one hand reached out, except to point, to whisper, to step aside. Elias felt the weight of eyes pressing down, but the bundle stirred against his chest, anchoring him. He turned to leave when a woman's voice broke the circle. "Let me see her." Clara Mayfield stepped forward, her shawl pulled close, her eyes carrying years of silence and shame. People whispered about her already, that she had been ruined, that no man would claim her. Now they hissed sharper, fitting, another shame in her arms. But Clara did not flinch. She reached out, hands steady, and Elias placed the baby in her care. The child sighed, nestling against her shoulder as if she had known Clara all along. For a moment the gossip thinned, replaced by something quieter, almost reverent. That evening, Elias found himself at Clara's small cabin on the edge of town. He had no words, no plans, only firewood stacked in his arms. She opened the door, the baby swaddled in a quilt. Their eyes met, and without speech, he left the wood by her hearth. Later she mended the tear in his shirt sleeve where barbed wire had caught him. Neither spoke of gratitude, but each gesture lingered, a thread binding them in silence. The day stretched. Together they tended the child. Clara sang soft lullabies, her voice trembling but true. Elias whittled a toy horse from pine, its edges smooth by his thumb. They shared little, no vows, no declarations, only the work of keeping breath alive in small lungs. But the town watched. Mrs. Crow told every customer that Boone and Mayfield were raising another man's sin. The preacher thundered about fallen women and men without shame. Boys at the saloon laughed, asking how long until Boone tired of playing father. One night, Elias nearly retreated into the life he knew best, solitude and silence. But when he looked across the fire and saw Clara rocking the child, her face tired yet luminous, he felt something shift inside him. The baby reached out, her tiny hand curling around his finger, and he understood. This was no accident, no burden. This was a vow. He would not abandon her. Not the child. Not the woman who held her with such unyielding grace. The gossip might rattle like loose tin in the wind, but Elias knew in his marrow. A sack in the dirt had become his reason to stand. And as the fire burned low, he felt the first flicker of belonging he'd known in years. The wind carried whispers long before the words reached their ears. By late autumn, the whole town had an opinion on Elias Boone and Clara Mayfield. None of it spoken to their faces, all of it clattering like tin down the alleys. Folks said Clara was no better than she'd ever been, that Elias had lost his mind, dragging shame into his home. They said the child, now named Hope, would be cursed by the sin she was born from. And yet, within Clara's cabin walls, something tender unfolded. Elias split wood, Clara sang over the cradle. They shared bread at the same table, passing plates without ceremony. The baby cooed and stretched toward their faces as though the world beyond gossip did not exist. It could not last. Reverend Gray thundered one Sunday about the blemish in our midst. His sermon was a fire set not on scripture, but on fear, and Sheriff Whitaker listened. By the next week, Elias found the lawman at Clara's door, hat in hand, but eyes hard. "The county'll take her," Whitaker said. "A child can't thrive under shadows. She'll be sent to an orphanage come Friday." Clara's hands trembled around the baby's blanket. She did not weep aloud, but Elias saw her shoulders fold inward as though a stone had been placed upon them. He said nothing. His jaw locked, his eyes burned, and he walked out into the cold without a word. That night, Elias sat alone at his cabin. The fire crackled low, throwing shadows on the walls where once a cradle had stood. Years ago, he had buried wife and child both in the same storm-torn night. He had sworn off tenderness then, sworn off God's cruel tests. But when he found the sack among the sage, he knew it had been no accident. He had been handed a choice: turn away again or stand. The memory of that faint whisper, "Mama," echoed like a hymn in his chest. By morning, his choice was clear. He returned to Clara's with bread in one hand and a carved wooden horse in the other. She was rocking Hope by the hearth, her face pale with sleeplessness. When she looked up, Elias set the bread down and placed the toy in her lap. The horse was rough, but Clara traced its curves as though it were gold. Their eyes met. No words, only an understanding passed between them. They would not give her up. Days turned into a quiet rebellion. They began calling the child Hope, a name spoken not with defiance, but with reverence. Clara hummed while she bathed her, and Elias built a cradle from cedar, each nail hammered like a vow. At night, Hope's small cries pulled them both from sleep, and they learned to share the burden. Elias pacing the floor with the child in his arms, Clara folding blankets around them. Neither said it, but both felt it. They were no longer alone. Still, the town sharpened its knives. At the general store, Mrs. Crow hissed when Clara walked in with Hope on her hip. "The three of you look like a picture of shame," she said, loud enough for all to hear. Clara lowered her gaze, the heat of judgment searing her skin. But Elias, standing behind her, laid a coin on the counter and picked up a loaf of bread. He handed it gently to Clara, his touch deliberate, like a shield raised against the crowd. For a moment, even the whispers faltered. By Wednesday, word spread that Sheriff Whitaker would ride for Clara's cabin with men at his side. They meant to take the child by week's end. Clara's panic was quiet but sharp. She clutched Hope tighter and whispered, "They'll send her off to die." Elias looked at her, the lamplight catching the grief carved in his face. His voice was rough, but steady. "Not while I've got breath." Friday night arrived heavy with storm clouds. The knock at the door came like a hammer, followed by the scrape of boots on dirt. Sheriff Whitaker and two deputies stood outside, their lanterns cutting into the dark. The Reverend's shadow hovered at the edge of the crowd, gathering in silence. Elias opened the door, shotgun resting easy in the crook of his arm. His voice was calm. "You're not talking her." Whitaker's jaw worked. "It's the law, Boone." "The law left her to die in a sack," Elias answered. "The law turned its back. She's ours now." Inside, Clara stepped forward, Hope in her arms. The baby's cry rang out, high and thin, yet strong enough to split the hush. The lamplight touched Clara's face, not bowed with shame this time, but steady, unyielding. She looked at them all as if daring the world to strike her again. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some lowered their eyes. Even Whitaker faltered, shifting his weight as though the ground beneath him had turned uncertain. Reverend Gray sputtered, but his words fell flat against the silence that had grown heavy with something larger than law, dignity. One by one, the men backed away. Boots scraped. Horses shifted. The lantern light retreated into darkness, leaving Clara and Elias standing in the doorway, the baby wailing but alive, alive. When the last rider disappeared, Elias lowered his gun. Clara let out a breath that shook her whole frame. She pressed her lips to the baby's hair, and for the first time since Elias had found her, Hope laughed, a small, sudden sound like bells in the night. The next morning, the town was alive with gossip, but no one dared challenge them again. At Clara's porch, Elias repaired the fence rail while Clara sat in her rocker, Hope cooing in her lap. The sun caught her hair, and for a heartbeat Elias saw not the woman branded by rumor, but the woman who had stood like a pillar against the storm. When Hope reached for him, Elias let her tiny fingers close around his thumb. A smile, small and certain, broke across his face. It was not romance declared, nor promise spoken, but something steadier, the slow burn of a life being built. And if the town still whispered, the prairie did not. The land itself seemed to bless their defiance with quiet wind and clear sky. So listen, dear heart. In a world quick to discard what is fragile, salvation often comes in small acts. A cradle built by hand, a loaf of bread passed in silence, the refusal to let go when the world says you should. Dignity is not given by a preacher's sermon or a town's approval. It is forged in the courage to love what others call unworthy. Remember this. Sometimes the bravest vow is made without words, only in the steady hand that stays, the hand that chooses to carry what others abandoned.